Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I am your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 9 of the 2022 podcast series where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft set to begin in April 2022. Well, it's still October 2021, which means September already in the past. We're looking ahead to conference play, and really things are starting to shape up a little bit in terms of what we can expect for the remainder of the season. Alabama and Georgia look like they're for real. And with Alabama and Georgia both, they went up against Ole Miss and Arkansas this past weekend. And what you saw with both teams were really the physicality up front. And that's really the difference between them and just about everybody else at the top of the rankings right now. And really with Alabama, you have Brian Robinson, really a one cut and go type of runner, bruising physical running back, but he actually showed off some decent feet, showed off the ability to drop his pads, run through contact, and really was that bell cap. Ran for over 175 yards. You've got Evan Neal out there on the outside doing his thing. He looks like a top 5 pick. I think he's got that locked down. And then with Georgia, the same thing. Really, a dose of Zamir White, crowd chanting Zeus every chance they got. You also had James Cook in the backfield, Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Milton. So it didn't matter who they put back there at running back. And the thing with it is you have Jamari Sawyer and you have Justin Schaefer, two guys who are going to be playing guard at the next level. These guys, they're run blockers. And that's really the biggest thing. Sawyer would have been exposed going up against Trey Williams if they were throwing the ball 30, 40 times a game. Trey Williams is one of those pass rushers that, look, they were able to get home with a 3-man rush against Texas A&M. And yes, I know that Williams was going up against a couple of freshman tackles, but the ability to get off, his ability to bend coming off the edge, he's an ascending prospect, a guy that can play both with his hand in the dirt in a 43, stand-up edge rusher in a 3-4 defense as well. The transfer from Missouri, this is a guy who I believe was leading the SEC in sacks, and Georgia completely neutralized him. With Ole Miss, their defense going against Alabama, they're really designed to defend the spread. And when you go up against that run, that run game, they just didn't have an answer for it. So Alabama and Georgia, and then really everybody else. You've got a Big Ten matchup with Iowa and Penn State. And I'll tell you what, it's going to really be an interesting matchup. I think, with Iowa, with their physicality, I like Tyler Goodson, the feet. Oh my goodness. This guy, the lateral quickness, the lateral agility. Tyler Linderbaum leading that inexperienced offensive line. They lost some guys from a year ago, but man, their offense looks really potent. And then defensively, very opportunistic. You got Jack Campbell, a guy who's only a junior. He'll be coming back for one more year. Zach Van Valkenburg, he'll end up probably being a midday 3 pick for Iowa, but just another defensive end coming for the Hawkeyes. And then their secondary, they have both Riley Moss and Matt Hankins there at the cornerback position. Riley Moss, he's a 6'2" corner, has a really good length, very opportunistic, instinctive corner there. So they have a lot of guys that they can move through that defense. Penn State, man, you want to talk about linebacker U. They have 3-4 linebackers that you can go to, whether it's Brandon Smith, Curtis Jacobs, Ellis Brooks, Jesse Luketa. Secondary, and again, we'll be talking about secondary here in a moment. Jaquan Brisker, one of the top safeties in the draft, and Tariq Castro Fields. And so you've got a lot of players there defensively. Up front, you've got Rasheed Walker, a guy who's going to probably come off the board on day 2 at left tackle, and Jahan Dotson, maybe one of the more underrated wide receivers in all of college football. So we've got some interesting matchups that are going to be coming in this coming weekend. Really be fun to watch. And obviously with Alabama taking on A&M, you're going to get to see DeMarvin Leal for the Aggies go up against Evan Neal one-on-one. That's going to be a battle. That's really what I want to watch. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun to really see who wins, between that duo. But I think in terms of the NFL draft and what we're talking about with the top 5 picks and who are the top prospects for the 2022 draft, I think 4 of them, at least in terms of the top prospects, have already been nailed down. 3 of them are on defense. I already mentioned Ed Neal there for Alabama, the left tackle. I mean, 6'7", 340 pounds, the dancing bear out there. It's to me, it's a lock. Penei Sewell should have come off the board in the top 5. He wound up falling to number 7 to the Lions. Unless something happens with a couple of quarterbacks there, Evan Neal has to go top 5. And then after that, you've got Kayvon Thibodeaux, top pass rusher in this year's draft. I know he's battled that ankle injury, against Fresno State, I think was when he sustained it, and really having a hard time coming back from that ankle. But man, before that happened, he was really wreaking some havoc against the Bulldogs, and that's a good Fresno State team that he was going up against. Had a strip sack on Jack Hayner, really changed the complexion of that game. And you have at corner Derek Stingley out of LSU. We're going to be talking about him here in a minute, and then you have Kyle Hamilton, the safety out of Notre Dame. So 2 guys from the secondary that are going to be playing in the top 5. When you think about that, the last corner to come off the board was Jeffrey Okudah in the top 5. The last safety that we saw come off the board, that high would have been Jamal Adams going off the board, number 6 overall. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic how everything plays out, because there's one thing that we haven't even talked about yet, and it's that quarterback position. Who's going to be the first quarterback to come off the board? Are we going to see 2 quarterbacks at the top of the draft? We know that teams like Pittsburgh are desperate for a quarterback. Atlanta, at some point, we're going to see Atlanta decide that they're going to make that transition and away from Matt Ryan and at least start bringing in a quarterback to start getting that process going, because they don't want to end up like Pittsburgh, where the cupboard is dry when their quarterback is ready to hang things up. So who is that quarterback going to be? Who are the guys that they're going to go after? Spencer Rattler out of Oklahoma and Sam Howell of UNC both have struggled. And I think a lot of their struggles can be attributed to the offensive line not really having a ton of time to make the throws, so they've been rushing their decisions. I think Sam Howell still holds on to the ball way too long. He's looking for the big play rather than just take what the defense gives him. And Spencer Rattler, he likes to drift a little bit, within the pocket. Tries to force things into coverage a little bit. I think for him, really for Rattler, he likes to get outside the pocket and throw on the move, kind of like a shortstop, and that's really where he's at his best. He's not the athlete that a Kyler Murray or a Jalen Hurts or even a Baker Mayfield are, in terms of running with the football. But he has that arm strength. It's one of those weird things with OU. Just like last year, they struggled to get things going. We've got the Red River Shootout against Texas this weekend. So this is a prime time for Spencer Rattler to potentially turn the corner and really get that offense going in the right direction. It would be interesting to see what happens. But there are some guys that are nipping at their heels. And with the way that Kyler Murray, who right now, in my opinion, is the favorite to win the MVP there in the NFL, Arizona Cardinals 4-0, and they beat the Rams this last weekend. And Kyler Murray, he's doing it with his legs, he's doing it with his arm. So teams, a lot of teams are going to be looking to find that guy, find a guy that can be mobile, that can has the incredible arm strength. And so there are 3 guys that I think are really moving up boards. One of those is Matt Corral out of Mississippi. And yes, I know you're going to say, well, he couldn't beat Alabama, couldn't get the job done. Why would I want to take him number 1 overall or number 2 overall? And I'll tell you, he's really cut down on that gunslinger mentality. He was not a number 5 quarterback coming into this season. And the big reason why was the inconsistency. This was a guy who would throw a ton of picks and just be so erratic with his decision making. And then after that, especially against, there's a stretch, I think, against South Carolina and Tennessee. And yes, I know that those defenses, not, the Bamas and such, but he really just put the lights out in terms of throwing the football down the field. I think there was a stretch where he had 10 touchdowns, no interceptions, and was just super efficient throwing the football. This year, you watch him against Bama, and even in a losing effort, this is a guy who only had 8 incompletions. A few of those were drops. So really, when you're talking about true incompletions that he threw, there weren't very many. And when you watch him and the decision-making process, this is a guy who I think is really putting everything together. This is the right time for Matt Corral. You watch the arm strength, the flick of the wrist, and the ball's out, going 40, 50, 60 yards down the field. But the short to intermediate throws, they get on his receivers in a hurry, and they allow the ball placement allows the receivers to get up the field to make plays. And I think that's one of the things that you can really speak to. You watched Ontario Drummond run those slants. You watch Braylon Sanders on the sideline. There was one play against Bama that I thought was really impressive. With him, it was a fourth down play, and he didn't even get the completion. But he was rolling to his left, had Drew Sanders, the linebacker, coming in his face, still kept his eyes down the field, and threw the football to Sanders down the sideline, put the ball away from the defender where only his receiver could get to it, and it just pulled the receiver out of bounds. I think Jalen Armour Davis, the corner, actually pulled the receiver out of bounds, actually pushed him out, but nearly got his feet in bounds anyway. And it was just one of those plays to where he's got somebody in his face. He's really throwing kind of off his back foot and still had the arm strength to throw it down the sideline, kept his eyes up, wasn't looking at the pressure, and able to get rid of the football. Guys like Sam Howell, they're not necessarily going to be doing that. And if you look at Carson Strong out of Nevada, not the most mobile guy by any means, and so we'll get to him in just a sec. He reminds me more of a Mac Jones, a guy that's going to be the efficient quarterback. But when we get back to the mobile quarterbacks, Matt Corral is one of the guys that's right up there. But I'll tell you what, Malik Willis is the real deal. And if you saw him play against UAB this past weekend, you'll understand why. This guy, 10 pass touchdowns so far in 2021, 4 rushing touchdowns as well. And what's incredible is when he gets out as a runner, and this is where Kyler Murray can excel as well. He does a great job evading the rush. He does a really good job a couple of times where he was actually wrapped up in the backfield. He was able to shake free. He's incredibly strong. This guy's put on a lot of weight, since the time at Auburn. He's now up to 225 pounds. He runs through would-be tacklers and then has that speed and the acceleration to get down the field, sets guys up and is juking guys out, much like Kyler Murray. You watch him when he throws the football, the arm strength to, just the flick of the wrist and the ball's out, and it's a freaking cannon. It's a laser getting to his guys, and just very effortless with those throws. There was a deep crossing route. CJ Daniels runs that route, put the ball on the money, just an effortless throw for 35 yards. Malik Willis may be the most dynamic quarterback in this year's draft, and because of that, there is a great chance that we could see the Liberty quarterback taken number 1 overall. Not necessarily sure that it's going to happen, but there's a good chance, much better chance, especially now that Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell have kind of sputtered down to open up the season. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Then you have Desmond Ridder, and you have a guy who is trying to lead Cincinnati into the college football playoff discussion. Cincinnati went into Notre Dame and beat the Irish. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially for a group of 5 team. And he went in there and accomplished that. He's erratic at times, especially with the deep ball accuracy. But you see, he's a long strider. He's a really tall guy, long strider, and is athletic. He can escape the pocket well. And when he's in the open field, pretty elusive. And you love the arm strength. His ability to throw the deep ball to Alec Pierce, a guy who I think is going to be an early day 3 prospect, better speed than I thought that he had, and a guy that's going to go up and attack the football in the air. Definitely a legitimate deep threat. But what I love with Ridder is the leadership. You watch him. This is a guy who was in total command of that offense, and just really does a great job running Luke Fickell's group, much like Matt Corral. If you watched him against Alabama, he was sitting there talking to his skill position guys. He was talking to his offensive line, really establishing that leadership. And that's something that really just kind of speaks to you when you watch those guys play. Now, I mentioned Carson Strong, and this is a guy, again, tremendous arm strength. A guy who can be super efficient in the short to intermediate. Does a really good job with some of his ball placement down the football field. Super accurate. So he reminds me a little bit more of Mac Jones. He's not going to be the athlete that any of the other quarterbacks are that I mentioned, but what he can do is be super intelligent with his passing and understand where to put the football, where to go with it, and understand when he's reading the defense. So Carson Strong's going to be one of those guys. I think day 2 is probably the most realistic for him, especially just with the number of quarterbacks that we're dealing with. But it's going to be really interesting to see how everything shakes out. So episode 9, if you follow my podcast, we've been doing my top 10 by position. And last podcast, we wrapped up the linebackers, both outside and inside. So we covered the edge rushers, off-ball linebackers, and then the Mikes as well. And now we're moving on to the secondary. That's really the last of my top 10 list. And we're going to work through the cornerbacks. We'll get to the safeties. And then what we'll do at the very end is we'll take a look at some of the matchups that are coming into the weekend that we haven't already discussed. So if we jump into the secondary, we're going to talk about the cornerbacks, and obviously the first guy that you have to talk about is Derek Stingley out of LSU. 6'1", 195 pounds. This was a dude who burst onto the scene in 2019, wins that national championship, freshman All-American, 6 interceptions, 15 pass breakups. You just see the fluidity with the way he plays. The hips, there's no wasted movement, turns and runs, puts his body in a position to make a play on the football. Super intelligent. And one of the things that you've seen as well with his ability to come up and tackle and play the run, you're talking about 6 tackles for loss in each of the, 6 tackles for loss in the last 2 seasons. And, only through 3 games in 2021, has a foot procedure that's going to go ahead and knock him out, it sounds like, for the rest of the season. In 2020, missed a couple of games as well. Also through camp, he was having some issues as well. It sounds like it's probably the same issue that he's dealing with his foot. So obviously there are some durability concerns. When you think about a guy like Caleb Farley, we were talking about him as potentially the number 1 corner in last year's draft. And then because of his back issues, ultimately he fell in the draft. I don't see that necessarily happening with Stingley as long as everything with that foot checks out. But it is one of those things where it is some cause for concern. There are red flags there, but this guy is an absolute athlete and a guy that deserves to be at the top of the list. When you think about him, over his first 2 seasons, I think they only completed 40% of the passes that were thrown his way. And again, he'll come downhill in the run game, a guy who is super explosive. One thing I will say, though, with his willingness to come up and tackle is while he is willing to do so, he needs to do a better job of actually wrapping up and tackling it. I think at the UCLA game, Kyle Phillips ran a crossing route underneath. Stingley ultimately got to the perimeter and got to the sideline and spun out of his tackle and got to the end zone for a touchdown. So really Stingley, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I see is he needs to work on that tackle ability just a little bit, making sure that he wraps up. But definitely a fast twitch athlete coming downhill, super explosive, and again, like I said, no wasted movement when he's attacking the football. Number 2 on my list is going to be Kaiir Elam, another guy who actually is battling an injury right now. He sat out, this past game against Kentucky, suffered a knee injury against Alabama, and then was out for another game. But 6'2", 196 pounds, and the junior, if you watched him in that Alabama game against Jamison Williams, one of the fastest receivers in this year, right in his hip pocket. And, there's, again, no wasted movement. You're talking about a guy who's 6'2", and he's keeping up with one of the more explosive receivers. And he even tried to stop and start and then come back to the football. Really, able to drive on the ball once it was out of Bryce Young's hands. Got a hand in to knock the football away. You see the makeup speed. That's one of the things that I think is also really impressive. Times his jump well, and really what I love is his ability to attack the football at the catch point. Really instinctive there. 18 pass breakups in his career, 5 interceptions to this point. I just hope that he gets back on the field and is healthy so that we really can see what Kaiir Elam has to offer. So with those 2 guys really battling some injuries, I think it's time to showcase Ahmad Sauce Gardner, another big corner. This dude's 6'2", 6'3", 200 pounds. Cincinnati Bearcats have a pair of really tall corners. So when you're talking about that defense, obviously there's Darian Beavers as well, Majai Sanders as a defensive end, but Sauce Gardner, Kobe Bryant, who we'll talk about here in a minute, those guys are leading the way. And with Gardner, look, 8 interceptions in his 3 seasons with the Bearcats, including 2 so far through 4 games in 2021, 14 pass breakups. As a freshman, 2 of his 3 interceptions, he actually returned for touchdown. And what I really love about this guy is, he likes to be physical, likes to be up on you. You see some savviness to him, the ability to, he shut down Ty Freifogel. That was one of the things that I thought was so impressive. Was Ty Freifogel, I thought, was going to be one of the better receivers. You're talking about the Big Ten receiver of the year, and only 1 reception for 13 yards. Absolutely shut the guy down. Stride for stride, no separation, no wasted movement when he was coming back to the football. Incredibly impressive there. This is a guy, again, he likes to be up on the line and bump and run, gets his hands on the receiver early to redirect. He'll sit underneath, read the quarterback's eyes in a hurry, and against Notre Dame, that was one of his picks. He was sitting there reading the quarterback's eyes, Darian Beavers in the quarterback's face, fading away, and ultimately kind of a duck, and it was an easy pick for Ahmad Gardner, but he put himself in position to make a play. And he'll line up into the boundary, he'll line up onto the wide side as well. But you love the physicality, you love the understanding too of some of the concepts. Kevin Austin running across the field on a crossing route, and the subtle tug of the jersey as they're going away from him. They talked about it on the broadcast, and it's just that savviness. That's one of the things that you don't see very often with college corners. They want to tug on the jersey, and it's really impeding the progress, and you see it so demonstratively, but very subtle with Ahmad Gardner, and was ultimately able to really, as the ball arrived, drive on the football, get an arm in, and break up the play. Savvy corner, and I'll tell you what, he's a guy that, keep an eye on his draft stock. I think he could end up moving up and be that second corner taken in the draft. Be on the lookout for Ahmad Sauce Gardner. Now, number 4 on the list, I got Andrew Booth out of Clemson, 6 foot, 200 pounds. This is a guy, if you look at the stat line, you're going to say, well, just 2 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, big whoop. But, this is a guy who I think, there's a reason why he doesn't see the football thrown his way all that often. He's a kid who is incredibly instinctive, has good ball skills. You see him against Georgia. He was in off coverage, read a swing pass to the running back James Cook, came downhill and actually beat the receiver's block to trip up the running back for no gain. He understands and reads the defense, or reads the offense really well. He closes in a hurry, makes sure he gets to the receiver, doesn't allow the receiver to turn upfield. Really fun matchup was him against Emeka Emezi there for NC State. One of the more underrated receivers coming into this year's draft. Possession guy. Look, Jacoby Myers came from NC State. Just remember that name when we get on draft day. I think he's going to get drafted. But when you watch Emezi, he jab step to the inside, then goes back to the outside. And what Booth does, he gets his hands on Emezi, pinches him to the sideline, and then does that look and lean and really pinches him and squeezes him so that there's really no room for that receiver to make a play. And look, he's looking back for the football. He has every right to that spot on the field as the receiver does. So really, took him out of the play. Back shoulder throw on the very next play ultimately was a touchdown. Inside position, really forced a perfect throw to the outside, and Devin Leary put the ball on the money, allowing Emezi to extend away from Booth. That was really impressive. That was actually the first offensive touchdown Clemson had actually given up. Booth is trying to just follow in the line of all the Clemson corners, right? You see all of them coming in, from A.J. Terrell to Trayvon Mullen. Andrew Booth is a guy that could be the next corner in that group. Michael Wright out of Oregon, 5'11", 182 pounds, a guy, 5 tackles for loss to go along with the 2 interceptions and 16 pass breakups. So, definitely a guy who loves to come downhill. He has 3 tackles for loss so far through 5 games this season. So definitely a guy who isn't afraid of contact. He's never going to shy away from it. But one of the things that I really was impressed with was the instincts that you saw in that Arizona game going against Jordan McLeod. McLeod was rolling out. It was around the goal line. and he thought he had a receiver there in the back of the end zone, and Mykael Wright really baited the quarterback into making the throw. He was sitting underneath, and the moment that Jordan McLeod started to make his throw, you see Wright drive on the football and ultimately extends right in that throwing lane, right in the end zone, extends for the football and makes the interception. Incredible play. And really, if you turn on that Ohio State game, I know Oregon beat Ohio State. If you turn on that game, you're going to see just a battle of tremendous athletes. He was battling Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. It was really a lot of fun. And I think Jackson Smith and Jigba also went over 100 yards. And I think some of that was due to, we got to get the ball to somebody else, because Mykael Wright was locking guys up. And I know that Olave and Garrett Wilson also went over 100 yards. But Mykael Wright, what I thought was impressive was he was able to keep up with both of those guys, showed that he can belong. You saw him in bail technique and no wasted movement, plans and drives with the receiver, supremely confident in his ability. That can get him into trouble a little bit. He was chirping a lot with the Buckeye receivers, but definitely a guy who has shown he belongs, and a guy that I think is definitely worthy of an early day 2 pick. Now, with Mykael Wright and Roger McCreary, I kind of gone back and forth between the two of them. McCreary, 6 interceptions in his career, 1 that he's already taken back for touchdown this year, and 18 pass breakups. But I'll tell you what, last year, this guy had 7 tackles for loss, a guy that really was physical against the run, a guy that wanted to come up and hit you, and that just carries over into 2021. He was a guy that I thought had a chance to be a first-round corner a season ago, and I think there's a good chance that we could see that happen again. One of the things that I loved was watching him go up against Jahan Dotson there, of Penn State, running stride for stride with Dotson, that look and lean again, just squeezing him into the sideline, gave him no room. One of his picks, it was really like a fair catch. Sean Clifford took a big hit from the linebackers, Jacoby McLean on a blitz. Ball kind of hung up in the air, got away from him. Easy pick. So, but really, even on those easy picks, they're putting themselves in a position to make a play on the football, even in those situations. But with McCreary, what I love, again, a 6-foot corner and a guy who's going to be really physical. I'm watching him, and I think there's a great chance that he could end up being a first-round corner. And just because Mykael Wright right now is sitting above Roger McCreary doesn't mean that McCreary won't end up passing him up. And when you talk about the corners and cornerbacks coming off the board in round number 1, I think that's probably the right time to talk about that. When you look at last season, obviously we had J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain come off the board in the top 10. And when you talk about that, you go back a year and you had Jeffrey Okudah and C.J. Henderson, same thing. 2 corners coming off the board in the top 10. And so 2019, kind of a down year for corners. You had Denzel Ward come off the board in 2018. But the cornerback position is becoming more and more of a focal point, obviously because of the passing game, safeties as well. And we'll talk about safeties here in a little bit. But when you talk about that cornerback position, and guys, look, we had 5 come off the board in 2021. In 2020, we had another 6 corners come off the board. So in 2021, in addition to Horn and Surtain, and then obviously Farley at 22 to the Titans, Greg Newsome went to the Browns, Eric Stokes going to the Packers. All of those guys look like keepers. You go back to 2020, Okudah and Henderson, and you had A.J. Terrell coming off the board at number 16, Damon Arnett, Noah Igbenogany, and Jeff Gladney. So corners. You got 6 guys who are really going to be those top corners. I think these are the guys that we're really talking about here. And then you get into Trent McDuffie, 5'11", 195 pounds, the redshirt sophomore there for Washington. And look, Elijah Molden is gone, so you have Trent McDuffie, you have Kyler Gordon, a pair of corners who are just dynamic. They're ball hawks. They have a nose for the football. Look, when you look at Trent McDuffie, he's got 3 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries to go along with a couple of picks, 5 pass breakups, has that nose for the football. A little undersized, a guy that we may end up seeing play some in the slot. You look at Kyler Gordon, he's the bigger corner, 6 foot, 200 pounds. Another guy, again, very instinctive, got his first 2 interceptions this season. Washington, a down year, but I'm telling you, those corners, they can play with anyone. They're 2 of the top four corners in Pac-12 play. You've got Michael Wright. One other guy to make mention of is Kaiir Kelly. Now, I have him number 9 on my list right now, but at 6'1", 186 pounds, a junior out of Stanford, really burst onto the scene this year. Couple of picks, one of which that he returned for touchdown against USC, 7 pass breakups, and this is the son of Brian Kelly, the former USC Trojan and Tampa Bay Buccaneer. But what I love about Blue Kelly is, obviously the length. That's one of the things that you definitely see with him. But you watch him go up against Drake London, and Drake London, you want to talk about a beast. He's absolutely that, leading the country in targets, leading it in receptions and touchdowns. He's just a physical freak. He is not Calvin Johnson, because I don't think he's going to be running in the 4.3s come the combine. But London, man, he attacks it like an aggressive basketball player going for a rebound, and it's really a lot of fun to watch. But you watch Blue Kelly, going over the top of Drake London on a go route, going up and knocking the football away, and you love being able to see him undercut the out routes, getting his hand in to make a play on the football as well. Really giving Drake London a hard time. And that interception that I mentioned, it was a slant to Drake London. It was 3rd and 5, and Kelly was just trailing the route, and London would have had the first down, but Keaton Slovis throws it off his back shoulder, goes through the hands of Drake London, right into the hands of Kelly, returns it 31 yards for the score. So he put himself in a position to make the play. One of the things that you did see was London ultimately used his strength to his advantage, muscled him, got him behind him, and boxed him out for an 11-yard touchdown. But still, Kelly, you saw him be physical, wanted to attack the football whenever possible. You saw him against not only the strength of London, but then he goes vertically against a speed merchant like Phillip Brooks at Kansas State. Gets inside leverage on him, able to high point and control the football, get a foot down as well, showed that body control. There was a swing pass going to Deuce Vaughn in the slot, ran through the receiver block, diving play to the receiver. Looks like he affected the pass with his jump, ultimately blew up the play because the receiver, Vaughn dropped the pass. And it's just the instincts, and you see the bloodlines that are there. I love the size. Paulson Adebo was the guy that really did a great job attacking the football. Kaiir Kelly is another guy to really keep an eye out for. And then another guy that I have in my group is Kobe Bryant out of Cincinnati, named after the late great basketball player Kobe Bryant, but spelled differently. Coby, 6'1", 198 pounds. This is a guy, 7 interceptions, 30 pass breakups, really good size, excellent ball skills. A guy that doesn't make a ton of mistakes out there, and a guy who's just, he's just going to be a consistent performer. And when you talk about guys, even here at 7, 8, and 9, if you look at this last year's draft, and you're talking about, well, who's going to come off the board, at that 7, 8, and 9 group. Well, if you're talking about 7, 8, and 9, they have a great chance to come off the board in round number 2. If you look at last year's draft, you had Tyson Campbell, Kelvin Joseph, and Asante Samuel all come off the board in round number 2. So if you're scoring at home, that's 5 corners coming off the board in round 1, and another 3 coming off the board in round 2. So that's 8 right there. So these guys you're looking at are going to be guys that are going to be considered in the first 2 rounds of the draft. And really after that, you could potentially fall to round 3 and still be a guy. Paulson Adebo fell to round 3, and he's looking like a keeper there for the Saints. Absolutely. Elijah Molden, also a 3rd rounder. Even Ifeatu Melifonwu for the Lions fell to round number 3. So there are a lot of guys that you can pick up later on in the draft. And so just showing that just because you're further down in some of the rankings doesn't mean that you're not going to find your home. When we talk about, number 10 on my list, 10, 11, you're looking at Tywone Mullen out of Indiana, 5'10", 180 pounds, the junior, excellent ball skills, 3 interceptions, 20 pass breakups, a guy who's also extremely physical, 83 tackles, but he had 8 of those whipped for loss, 3.5 sacks, very instinctive, a guy. And again, I talk about Elijah Molden being a playmaker. I look at Tywone Mullen. I think he's going to be a nickel at the next level, much like Elijah Molden. Play a lot of his time, spend that time in the slot. But a guy who I think is definitely going to be a third rounder and a guy that's going to come in and make some plays right away for whoever drafts him. A couple of other guys to mention, Josh Jobe out of Alabama, Derek Kendrick of Georgia, formerly of Clemson. Now with Josh Jobe, 16 pass breakups, including 11 a season ago. He really had a stellar 2020 season. I think he struggled a little bit so far in 2021, has only played in 3 games, so I think injuries have kind of slowed him up. And it may be injuries that have affected his play, but a lot of penalties against Josh Jobe, against Florida. I don't know how many times he was called for defensive pass interference in that game. Jacob Copeland down the sideline, gets his hands on the receiver, impedes his process of the receiver when he was coming back to the football. Receiver goes down. Later on in the game, runs up the back of Copeland on a vertical route. Just needs to be more composed as a corner. You wonder again if injuries are playing a part in that, but still, that's something that has to be cause for concern. You look at Derek Kendrick, and this is a guy who supremely confident there at Clemson, a guy that people were talking about as a potential first rounder coming into last year's draft. Then ultimately he was left Clemson, was excused from the team there. Obviously the off-field issues teams are going to have to take a look at. Moves to Georgia. He's played in 5 games, but just hasn't really found his footing there with the Bulldogs. And that's really one of the things that you're concerned about is what you're going to see with Derek Kendrick. Can he return to that form from Clemson? He's going to have to answer to really why he had to leave Clemson and move to Georgia. Some of those off-field concerns, and really with his play there at Georgia, I think that could send his draft stock down. You could be looking at a guy that teams may take in the 4th or 5th round, and you're saying, okay, if that's the case, teams could get a steal if he can really get things going. But that's really the biggest concern right now that I have for Derek Kendrick. Switching gears to the safety position. And obviously when we talk about safeties, you have to talk about number 14 for the Fighting Irish, and that's Kyle Hamilton, 6'4", 219 pounds. The junior has been a stud ever since he walked on campus there in South Bend. 4 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, there in 2019 to go along with 41 tackles, upped it up to 63 tackles there in 2020. Had an interception and 6 pass breakups there. This is the guy that teams have been wanting to get their hands on really since that freshman year, his freshman All-America season. And, a guy who he can be physical against the run. He plays well over the top. He can cover. And for a guy his size, being 6'4" and 220 pounds, the fluidity in his hips and his ability to turn and run and sink those hips and come back to the football, drive on routes, is really impressive. And man, against Cincinnati, he even showed that he can be a gunner. Pumped by Jay Bramlett, a guy who's known for all of his hang time, flies down the field and just buries Ryan Montgomery. Didn't fair catch, arrives right after the catch, delivers that huge hit, drives through the punt returner, a legal huge hit on the punt returner. You saw against Florida State, just the incredible range. This was the guy, he was lined up on the opposite hash and is reading this throw coming all the way across the field. And I think when the ball was actually released, he was at the near hash, still had to get all the way to the sideline. Diving interception, made a play on the football. He lined up against the running back in that game, Deshaun Corbin, in the slot. Very good hips, change of direction. Quarterback released, undercut for the pick along the sideline. Very impressive play there as well. You saw in Wisconsin, 3rd down play, covering Jake Ferguson, went in motion out into the flat. He used his hands at the top of the route to slap Kyle Hamilton's hands away on inside, and gets inside leverage on him. But you saw Hamilton quickly recover on his hip, use his length to disrupt the catch point. Ultimately, the ball was thrown too far out in front of Ferguson by Graham Mertz, and otherwise, really, Kyle Hamilton would have made the play. It reminds me also of the Cincinnati game where he was covering Trey Tucker in the slot. Receiver plants and gets to the outside, had a step, but you saw Hamilton recovering and really expected the ball to be thrown on the outside. If he does that, he makes a play on the football, possibly even picks it off. But ultimately what happened was Ridder underthrew it a bit to the inside. Whether or not he meant to do it, that's really up for debate. But ultimately, he tried to get back around and wound up not being able to do so, and Tucker wound up scoring. But just the intelligence, the understanding where that football is going to be, and looking to make a play, not where where the football is, it's where the football is going to be. And I thought that was really still showing off those instincts there for Kyle Hamilton. And again, he's a sure tackler in the open field, does everything that you want. He's a team captain there for the Irish. To me, he has to be considered as a top 5 pick, absolutely. And he can play a linebacker in the box. You can move him out, really move him wherever you want to on the field. He's just a dynamic playmaker. For me at number 2, I'm looking at Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State. 6'1", 204 pounds, a guy who has 104 tackles so far in his career, 7 going for loss, 4 interceptions, 11 pass breakups at that safety position. And again, when you talk about versatility, you have to bring up Jaquan Brisker's name as well. What I saw there with Auburn running 4 verticals, able to adjust and get back outside on Demetrius Robertson. Got a hand up at the end there to make a play. You saw reading a screen in front of him, ran through Samuel Schenker, the tight end's block, dropped the receiver for a 1-yard loss there as well. What was it? The running back, Jarquez Hunter, tried to juke him in the open field one-on-one, but he was able to trip up that running back, grabbing his foot, and got him to trip up there as well. A guy who, even in the end of that game, 26-yard line of Penn State with 3 seconds left. Penn State only up 28-20. Bo Nix back to pass, looked to his left on the post. Brisker reading the play, drove on the football downhill, broke up the pass to seal the win. A guy who just always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Against Wisconsin, he showed his toughness, had calf tightness in the game, went down 4 different times, still battled back, still wanted to be in there and make a play. This is a guy who I think, he has some cover skills, a guy against the run. He's shooting downhill through the A-gap, making a play, sometimes behind the line of scrimmage. I'm a big fan of number 1 there for the Nittany Lions. He's number 2 on my list. And then we're going to have to travel out west. So we start from the East Coast. We're going to move to the West Coast. And we're going to talk about Verone McKinley. Don't let that size fool you. He's only 5'11", 194 pounds. But Verone McKinley III, number 23 for Oregon, is the guy who just flies around to the football all over the field. You see the instincts, his ability to play over the top, and that sideline to sideline ability. You also see the ball skills. He's able to attack the football in the air. One of the things that you saw in that Ohio State game, C.J. Stroud looking for a crossing route, was forced from the pocket, rolling to the right, trying to hit a receiver along the sideline. Ball sailed a little bit, and as Verone McKinley was coming over the top, able to not only pick off the pass, but had the body control to get both feet in bounds to seal that win. You saw kickoff return by Emeka Egbuka, and he comes in, rips at the football for a strip. Ball ultimately bounced back to Ohio State, but a guy who's making plays there in the kicking game as well. Downhill, attacking the football, drilling Garrett Wilson as the ball arrived at the catch point. The versatility there from Verone McKinley is what I really enjoy, what I like to see. He's number 3 on my list right now, a guy that I think can come in there and play right away at the next level. Daxton Hill out of Michigan, another guy that you can also say the same thing. 6 foot, 192 pounds, a junior, 3 interceptions in his career, 11 pass breakups, has 104 tackles, 5 going for loss, also has a half sack to his credit. A guy who, you talk about versatility, and all these guys are very versatile. And I think that's what really speaks to the type of talent that we have at this safety position in 2021. I think his performance against Wisconsin just really speaks to the versatility. You saw the range coming over the top against the pass. You saw the downhill ability to deliver a big hit on crossing routes. You also saw his ability to line up in the slot, take off at the snap, and drill the quarterback for a sack. He can play coming from depth and make plays against both the run and affecting the quarterback in the pocket. One of the things that I thought was really impressive, there was a deep out by Shamir DK, closed, recovered after the cut, ripped down on the receiver's left arm as he was going to the ground to force that interception. Then he comes back later on, a leaping interception as the backup Chase Wolf stared down his receiver, was sitting underneath that out route, jumped and picked off the pass. They're up 23-10 in the fourth quarter, which led to a score, and ultimately Michigan was able to go on and beat the Badgers. One of the things that I thought was really good against Washington is the ability to keep outside leverage against the run. Plays going off tackle, forced the run back inside, spilled it back into that linebacker. And then against Western Michigan, there was a catch in the flat, a check down to the running back, came from depth in a hurry to break on the football and light up the running back, Jackson Kincaid, for no gain. Very aggressive, excellent closing speed. You saw him blow up a tunnel screen there against the Broncos as well for no gain. A guy that likes to play around the line of scrimmage but isn't afraid to play over the top, can cover a little bit. Very explosive player. So you love that versatility. That's why I have him sitting there at number 4 on my list. At number 5 is Brandon Joseph. They're out of Northwestern. And the thing with Brandon Joseph, obviously, I think everybody was talking about him bursting onto the scene in 2020 with 6 interceptions. And I think that's one of the things that obviously is going to jump out is the ball skills and his ability to, he takes good angles to the football, reads the quarterback well, no wasted movement, trusts his eyes, and just drives on the football there. Tremendous range coming over the top as well. So when you think you've got man coverage, you think that you're able to fit a ball in, he can come from the opposite side of the field to make a play on the football, and also takes really good angles coming from depth against the run. I think what's different from separates those other corners from Joseph is I think those other corners are a little bit more physical than Joseph, and that adds to their versatility. You're not going to see Brandon Joseph playing in the box. He's more of a guy that's going to be your center fielder, a guy that's going to play deep, and there's always a home and always a place for those guys. I just think some of that versatility is really going to, that's why I have them in my top 4. I'm not going to sit there and move Brandon Joseph outside of my top 5 because the ball skills are ridiculous. When he arrives at the football, he's going to make a play on it, and chances are he's going to come down with a pick. You look at Northwestern, and they have a history of defensive backs making it to the next level. Ibrahim Campbell is getting playing time still there in the league. Obviously, Greg Newsome was a first-round pick in this past year's draft. I think Brandon Joseph is going to be the next defensive back there coming for the Wildcats. Number 6 on my list is Jalen Petrie out of Baylor. 6 foot, 197 pounds. Very versatile. He played linebacker his first 3 years there with the Bears. Ultimately moved to safety, kind of that star position. 143 tackles in his career, 23 going for loss, including 11 last season. 4.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, 2 of which were returned for touchdowns. 4 pass breakups and a couple of forced fumbles as well. And really what you say is this is a guy, he loves to play in the box. He loves to come up and try to hit you. He's physical. He's going to be playing all over the field. Against Iowa State, he was having a lot of fun trying to contain Breece Hall, beating tackles coming off the blitz and getting into the backfield. But here's the thing with Jalen Petrie, and what kind of drives me nuts is he flies out of control. Against Iowa State, he had Brock Purdy, had him in his sights coming off the blitz, actually was able to sack him, but because he was so out of control, Purdy was able to spin away and escape that pressure. What you saw against Oklahoma State, there were several times where he was able to make a play. There was one where Spencer Sanders quarterback draw, and he was trying to bounce it to the outside. Petrie coming downhill, out of control, dives at the quarterback's legs, and ultimately whiffs. And same, with a run play with Jalen Warren, the transfer there, the transfer running back for Oklahoma State, and he had the chance to make the tackle on Jalen Warren for just a little gain, but he just dove wildly and whiffed completely on the running back, who ultimately scored on a 7-yard touchdown scamper. And so the thing with Petrie is yes, he's a ball hawk. Yes, he flies around to the football, But when he's coming downhill, he needs to be under control. He needs to ultimately line up his guys, square him up, and drive through the ball carrier. Right now, he's not reliable enough for me to really put him into my top 5. I think a lot of people are excited about his ability to fly around. I thought he really did a good job, really tormenting Charlie Kolar when he's dropping into coverage. But if you can't tackle guys in space, you're not going to be on the field very long, and that's one of the things that I think he does need to definitely clean up. Jalen Catalon out of Arkansas, undersized safety, 5'10", 210 pounds, redshirt sophomore, 5 interceptions, 8 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles in his career, had 99 tackles in 2020 as a redshirt freshman. And this is a guy who, again, is all over the field, incredibly instinctive, loves to play against the run. So you're going to see him lining up in the box quite a bit. Against Georgia, he's lining up, in the box, making plays against the running backs in the backfield. He's a strong safety, a guy that's just, he's going to look to hit you. He's going to look to wrap you up and make some plays. Has some range as well against the pass, but he's a guy that I think is more of a box defender than anything else. When I look at Lewis Cine out of Georgia, 6'1", 210 pounds. A season ago, he was known for that big hit on Kyle Pitts that knocked him out for a couple of games. It was a targeting penalty, really, came over the top, and concussion there for Pitts. Everybody wanted to see Kyle Pitts make plays, and that was the big hit that kind of knocked him out. But when you look at Cine and what he's able to do, what I thought was impressive against Treylon Burks, going up against Arkansas, the big physical receiver, climbs the ladder with his right hand, comes over the top and jars the ball free from the receiver. I thought that was really impressive. You saw against South Carolina, comes downhill, meets the big physical running back Kevin Harris in the hole, drills him, but it doesn't wrap up, and ultimately the running back falls forward. So again, this is another guy who's going to look for the kill shot, but he doesn't wrap up all the time. So that's really one of the things that you worry about. But what I did like against Clemson is ability to cover the tight end. Braden Galloway on a wheel route was able to take him away. DJ Uiagalelei, was looking that way, and he wasn't able to go there. Later on, you saw on a crossing route to Galloway, drove on the football to break it up. There was a return route to the tight end on a 3rd and 5 play, able to punch the ball free as the tight end was turning up the field. Ultimately was ruled an incomplete pass. And his ability to play over the top. Against South Carolina, did a really good job. I think it was a 43-yard play to Josh Vann on this deep ball over the top, came over and got a hand in between the arms of the receiver. And Vann ultimately bobbled it, tried to control it to the ground, wound up hitting the ground. That ability to play over the top, that ability to affect the catch point, get his hands in between the hands of the receiver, ultimately made that play and really prevented a big gain, 43 yards there against the Gamecocks. So that versatility again with Lewis Cine is something that definitely shows up. He just needs to play a little bit more under control. I think that's the biggest thing for me right now. Isheem Young out of Iowa State, 5'10", 210 pounds, redshirt sophomore, sat out the 2019 season with his redshirt year, and was one of the top safeties for Iowa State there in 2020. And he's really an impact player for the Cyclones in 2021. He's a redshirt sophomore, so I don't know that he'll necessarily decide to enter the draft, but he's physical. You're going to see him play in the box, fills downhill against the run. A guy who is incredibly intelligent as well. You saw him against Baylor as the quarterback Bohannon was going down, got his hand in and was able to reach the ball free, punched it loose, and then after the ball was punched loose, it was right before the quarterback goes to the ground. He gets his hand in there and rips it free, and then as Treston Ebner, the running back, was trying to recover, he was able to rip the ball out of the running back's grasp as well. And then, the other safety, Kim Manny King, ultimately recovers the football. Iowa State going the other direction. Again, he's physical coming downhill from depth as a robber. Against Iowa was mirroring, Tyler Goodson, sees the handoff, shoots downhill, wraps him up. Very physical. I think that's the thing that you really see with Isheem Young. He's a guy that's going to love to play in the box, love to fly around and make some plays on the football. Read a deep ball to Tyrone Tracy there against the Hawkeyes, up the middle of the field on a post. showed really good closing speed to recover, anticipating the throw to ensure that the pass was defended. I really am a fan of Isheem Young, and I think he's one of those ascending prospects. Jordan Battle out of Alabama, 6 foot, 210 pounds, another big hitter, one of the leaders of that Alabama secondary. And then Tyke Smith there for Georgia, a guy who's also battled some injuries, 5'10", 198 pounds. When you saw him in West Virginia, a guy that just continued to make plays, 10 and a half tackles for loss, 4 interceptions, 9 pass breakups, but he's another guy that's been battling injuries there at Georgia. They're getting him back. They're going to get him back into the flow of the defense. I've got him outside of my top 10 right now just because we haven't gotten to see too much of him in 2021. I think some of these other guys have really stepped up their play, and that just speaks to the amount of depth at the safety position. So I'm really looking forward to seeing really how the secondary as a whole, because you see a lot of corners as well that are really exceptional. And we haven't mentioned everybody on that cornerback list. There are a lot of guys. So as we move closer and closer to the draft, as we start talking about the different positions, the secondary, there are a lot of guys that are out there that we're going to be excited about, and hopefully week to week we'll be able to showcase some of those corners and safeties going forward. So that puts a wrap on my top 10 list. So now let's take a look at the matchups going into the weekend. For those of you on Friday, October 8th, looking to find something to do on your Friday night, how about tune in to watch Cincinnati at home, Nippert Stadium, number 5 ranked Bearcats taking on Temple, Desmond Ridder and company. You'll get to see the corners that we just talked about, Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant, Alec Pierce, the receiver, Darian Beavers, the linebacker, reminds me a lot of Zaven Collins. Stanford and Arizona State. The Cardinal flying to Tempe, Sun Devil Stadium to take on Arizona State, number 22 ranked Sun Devils. Arizona State, you'll get to watch Jaden Daniels, a very efficient quarterback, tremendous athlete. I really want to see this guy open up the playbook a little bit more. I see a lot of the athleticism, I see some of the accuracy, but I really want to see him open up things a little bit more and really get some more of those throws down the field. That short to intermediate, yes, we're able to see that, but can I see him push the football down the field? It usually seems like if they run those routes deep, he ends up wanting to take off because that offensive line may not always be holding up. Although that offensive line does have Kellen Deesh at left tackle, they also have Donovan West at center. 2 guys that we'll be talking about as the season progresses for sure. The linebacking core there, especially with Merlin Robertson and Darian Butler. Jack Jones, the corner, is someone else to keep an eye out for. Sun Devils. Stanford, though, with Tanner McKee, that quarterback is the real deal. He's really one of those guys that is on the rise, and a guy that we're going to be talking about. He and Oregon State's Chance Nolan, 2 quarterbacks that nobody's been talking about, but they're really the talk of the Pac-12 right now. Moving on to Sunday, I mentioned the Red River rivalry, number 6 Sooners and the number 21 ranked Texas Longhorns, Cotton Bowl, Dallas, Texas. You got the Texas State Fair going on, and Spencer Rattler, let's see what you can do against this Texas defense. You got DeMarvion Overshown. DeMarvion Overshown, number 0, reminds me a lot of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the second-round pick of the Browns in this past year's draft. What he did there for Notre Dame, you're going to see a lot of the same things there with Overshown. I think that's going to be really a nice test for Spencer Rattler to really see if he can elevate his game and take things to the next level. You've got Ole Miss taking on Arkansas. So the 2 losers of the games against Bama and Georgia will duke it out in Vaught Hemingway Stadium there in Oxford, Mississippi. Matt Corral getting to go up against that 3-man front. And that's going to be fun to watch because Arkansas, they're going to rush 3, drop 8, and they're going to see if Trey Williams can get home coming off the edge. What can Matt Corral do to adjust? And really, when you have 8 guys dropping, what are you going to do with the football? Hopefully Jonathan Mingo will be able to come back and you'll have another receiver there in that passing attack. On Arkansas side, you got KJ Jefferson there. Want to see them run the football a little bit better, but Treylon Burks is worth the price of admission alone. You'll also get a chance to see Jalen Catalon, the safety there, play for the Razorbacks as well. Georgia moving on to Jordan-Hare Stadium to take on the number 18th ranked Auburn Tigers. The question will be, is JT Daniels healthy enough to play, or is Stetson Bennett going to be in there again? We may see a huge dose of the running game with Zamir White running the football behind that physical offensive line. Bo Nix is going to be running for his life. When you see a guy like Jordan Davis, who's 6'6", 360 pounds, that man-child, I mean, that dude is huge. And yet, I wouldn't be surprised if he runs a sub 540 because of just the explosiveness, his ability to run running backs down to the perimeter, and then the bevy of linebackers. I mentioned Penn State. Well, Georgia's got, they've got so many guys there. You've got Nolan Smith who can rush off the edge. Channing Tindall, very versatile, can play inside or outside. You got Quay Walker there, and then the best blitzing linebacker in the country in Nakobe Dean, a guy who was just so disruptive there at inside linebacker. To me, he's the best inside backer in the country. I don't think there's a question. A lot of people like Christian Harris. I just don't think Christian Harris can cover nowhere near the way that Nakobe Dean can. So that'll be a fun matchup to watch, but I think Georgia ends up running away. Wake Forest, let's see how for real they are. They'll take on Syracuse there in the Carrier Dome, number 19th ranked Demon Deacons against Syracuse. That'll be a fun game. I'll finally get to watch the Demon Deacons play, and Syracuse for that matter. I'll be excited to watch that. Number 4 ranked Penn State Nittany Lions. Just mentioned that game earlier. Going to Kinnick Stadium against number 3 ranked Iowa Hawkeyes. That's going to be a fun game. Can Penn State take out Tyler Goodson? That's really what you need to do, is force them to be one-dimensional and force Spencer Petras to beat you. Put guys in the box and let's see what Spencer Petras can do. He's been inconsistent. When he does throw the football down the field with accuracy, he can be deadly. But the problem with it is you don't see it often enough. A lot of throws that are behind, a lot of just ill-timed throws. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Penn State, Sean Clifford, an up and down season. The running back, really a running back by committee. Noah Cain is probably going to get the start there. And then obviously you have Jahan Dotson, but Penn State, they're going to live and die by that defense. And I think Penn State ends up eking out that one, even though Tyler Goodson, if he gets off and running, then there's no way Penn State can come back. But I just think that defense will bottle up Tyler Goodson and force Spencer Petras to beat him. And I just don't know that that's going to happen. So we move on. Notre Dame traveling to Blacksburg. I'll be curious to see just how many quarterbacks will be playing. Jack Cohn, Drew Pine, Tyler Buckner. Who's it going to be? Kyron Williams is going to have a big game. You've got Amari Barno there for Virginia Tech. So I'll want to keep an eye on that game for sure. Kentucky, hey, they're number 16 in the country now. So they're a legitimate team, if you will, legitimately ranked team. Josh Paschal, there's a name to know. Number 4 for Kentucky. He's the tackle for loss leader in the SEC. So explosive getting up the field. You watch his hands, his ability to bend. He can play either on the outside, or they've lined him up at defensive tackle to shoot gaps and really wreak havoc against those guards. Keep an eye out for him in that game. Watching him against LSU. Kayvon Thibodeaux is going to have a big game for LSU. That's going to be an interesting one. Bama traveling to A&M. A&M unranked. I think ultimately it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out, because I think you've got that front, you've got Peavy, you've got Leal really going up against that vaunted Alabama offensive line. And I think if they can pressure Bryce Young, then you potentially have something going for you. But man, if they start running the football with regularity, those linebackers really are going to have to step up and make plays. The D-line is going to give them opportunities to make plays. That's really where I worry. Aaron Hansford, there was a run play, and he ends up shoving the running back forward instead of actually wrapping up. Just a terrible tackling for the Aggies. And you have to play perfect football against Alabama, and I just don't see that happening. USC continuing to try to resurrect their season under interim head coach Dante Williams. They take on Utah at the Coliseum. Carson Palmer, SC's Heisman Trophy winner, back when I went to school at SC, Carson Palmer is going to be recognized for his College Football Hall of Fame induction there at the Coliseum. USC, I expect them to take care of business there against Utah. Tune in and watch that game. It's a late game there at the Collie, but again, Drake London worth the price of admission for sure. So those are the games to really be on the lookout for and keep an eye on. There's a lot for me to cover, so we'll be talking about who really stood out for me this weekend in our next podcast that'll be released next week. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you are as well. So until next time, everyone, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. And until next time, I am out of here.